Thank you so much, Anna, for that nice intro. I'm Rob Hudson. I want to welcome everybody here to Alberta Law Libraries Legal Research Basics for public libraries, librarians of all types. I'm a law librarian, and I have been at the Alberta Law Libraries for 2 years. I work in downtown Edmonton at the courthouse. So if you're in Edmonton and want to see where I work, please ask for Rob. I'm going to be introducing myself and doing some of the slides. I have both a law degree and a library degree. My library degree is from UBC, and my law degree is from the States. I was also admitted to the bar in the state of Nevada, so I have both of those backgrounds. I really, though, enjoy just researching for people reference and doing all kinds of projects for different types of clients. So I really look forward to working with all of you. And next slide, please. We have learning objectives, things we hope you can take away from the presentation. And maybe it's just who we are. Why are we here? And what does Alberta Law Libraries do? So the basic functions of some of the courts will be covered. Some of the keywords and concepts. We're going to talk about some pretty important things like the common law. And then things that you'll recognize, primary versus secondary sources in other disciplines. Well, what does that mean in the legal sense? Where to find legislation and case law. Where to find court forms. I have people come into the Edmonton branch of our Alberta Law Libraries all the time looking for court forms. All of these things are very easy to do if you do them on a regular basis, but if you just do it once in a while, it takes just a little bit of knowledge, which we'll try to share with you. We do have a lot of helpful secondary sources. We'll show you some on the slides. And then where to find legal help and research. And then finally, open for a Q&A. Next slide, please. Who are we? Well, Alberta Law Libraries. You notice it is plural, so we have multiple locations across the province. And I'm in Edmonton, but there are people in Calgary and Red Deer, and you can imagine the network. And we serve a diverse population in Alberta, and we're proud of it. Our mission is access to justice for legal research. This is our homepage. I hope you've been there already, looked at it. It has a lot of resources here, including you can see across the top things like research guides on topical areas that we get asked a lot of questions. Navigating legal research, if you wanted to find where you could find cases, where you could find legislation, where you can find forms I mentioned. And then contact us is there as well. We have a team monitored inbox and that we can respond to your questions Monday through Friday. Stay current is another one. So you can see there's a lot of information here on the tabs and also on the tiles. So I really encourage you to explore that. Next slide, please. Who do we serve? We have a diverse clientele or patron base, members of the public. So people ask me, Rob, are you open to the public? Can I don't have a card. I'm not a lawyer. Can I come in? And for the publicly accessible locations of Alberta Law Libraries, yes, of course. And I'm going to encourage everybody listening to me to get a public e-users account. And I'll show you how to do that at the end of the presentation, because we really do want to share to the extent that our licensing and copyright will allow with our resources with the public. But our core patron base are the legal professionals. And you can imagine there'll be the Law Society of Alberta members, judicial. I personally work a lot with the government lawyers, so I work on a lot of civil litigation and research, which I really enjoy. And then we also interact with the other libraries, and so we're here to try to outreach from our point of view and try to get as many opportunities for collaboration as possible. So we really do have a who we serve mandate, which I think are doing very well at based on our usage statistics and a lot of the feedback we get. Next slide, please. And here's the disclaimer. So we are not practicing lawyers. We can only provide legal information. We don't try to provide the other stuff, the legal advice. which includes things like how to fill out forms, what forms you need to use, conducting legal research for people, telling people what you should do next. You don't want me to tell you that. I know that for sure. Or providing an opinion on a legal matter. That's a practice of law, and we're not interested in that. We're really facilitators to get people to the legal information, which is what they can do, what they can use in order to be self-represented litigants or to better interact with their own lawyers and whatever administrative or court procedure they're part of, whatever transactional problems they may have. So we do not provide legal advice, but we do have some referral slips and other things that we may talk about later in the presentation. Next slide, please.
Okay, and I think that now it's coming over to me. My name is Angela Ashton. I'm a law librarian here at Alberta Law Libraries. I've worn a few hats throughout my career. I did start off as a lawyer and was called to the bar in Alberta. I practiced mainly family law for a few years and then had kids, got my master's in library studies, ran a small business that was of yarn dyeing. So I've really done a lot of interesting things, but I have to say, this is definitely the place that I want to be. I feel very much that I'm fulfilling my destiny here as a law librarian. Definitely identify as a librarian, not a lawyer. I know that's a bit probably controversial, but I love librarians, libraries, etc. So I'm taking you into the nitty gritty right now because last year we had a similar presentation for libraries and we went through our materials, who we are, what we do, our collection. But if you're like me, I like to know like why. Why are we doing this? Why are we using these materials? So we've added this section, which is, like, get ready. It's going to be a lot of information coming at you, but hopefully this will give you a foundation or a bit more of an understanding of our collection and how we use our resources. So I will start by just explaining the basic functions of the courts in Alberta. There are three types of courts, basically. We have our trial courts, so that's the lower level courts that decide the facts and apply the law. This includes the Court of Justice, which used to be called the Provincial Court, and over the years, it has changed. Their purview has changed. It used to be that the civil cases, the total amount was a lower number. Now it's here's civil cases where there's seeking damages for up to $100,000. There's also a lot of criminal matters that go ahead and regulatory offenses. And then, of course, family and youth matters are also heard at the Court of Justice. The Court of King's Bench, formerly the Court of Queen's Bench, is the superior trial court. So they hear civil trials for matters over $100,000, criminal matters depending on the nature of the offense and how long you may end up in jail because of it, incarcerated, and then also appeals from the Court of Justice in some situations. Next, we have the appeal courts, and the appeal courts decide the law. So, if you were to read a decision from from one of the trial courts, you will see a lot of discussion of the facts. You'll hopefully see a discussion of the law, but that level of court is really about determining going through the evidence and determining the outcome. Sometimes people will argue there's an error of law or mixed fact and law, and that's one of the things that is important. Is just because someone doesn't agree with the outcome at trial doesn't necessarily mean they have a right of appeal. Not going to go into that, but at the Court of Appeal, you see a lot more discussion of the law, the proper application of the law, and how it's been interpreted by the trial court. So the Alberta Court of Appeal hears appeals from all levels of court, depending on the type of matter and the legislation. And then we have the Supreme Court, and they're like, no, really, this is the law. And I say this because it's juicy. There's drama at the appeal level. There have been many situations, anyway, there have been situations across the country where our Court of Appeal might disagree disagree with the Court of Appeal decision in Ontario and Saskatchewan and so on. So in that situation, if there's disagreement or if there's confusion, depending on the process, the Supreme Court is the one that says, no, 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 this is how we apply the law. So it's the highest court in Canada, and it's the final general court of appeal. It's the court of last instance. And so I'm not going to go into detail with this, but generally cases must be of public importance and have national significance or have an appeal as of right. And you see that in criminal matters. So those are the basic types of courts and functions of the courts. Now, again, this is really important stuff, and I hope I don't lose you. But I think it's important to just mention these aspects of the law before we get into discussion of where to find resources. So federalism, isn't that just a thrilling word in and of itself? But it's important to note that the power and duties of government are split between two levels. So there's federal matters, there's provincial matters. So if you were to come into our library and have questions about research, that might be one of our first questions is, well, what sort of a matter is this, to determine if it's federal legislation or provincial legislation. And generally speaking, federal matters are of general or national importance. So a good example is transportation, whereas provincial matters, more local, property and civil rights. But there are also areas of law where there is concurrent or overlapping jurisdiction. An example of this is family law. So at the federal level, we have the Divorce Act, which covers divorce in all of the provinces. But then we also have the Family Law Act, which is specific to Alberta. And every province has their own family law act for non-married couples. And so that's where it can get a little bit confusing. But just to be aware of that. And then the next important concept is bijuralism. And I think it is important to note, especially with everything that's going on in the world right now, is we're unique in that we have a mixed legal system due to the nature of our history. So the common law is what is followed in the provinces and territories. But Quebec, having been of a different, basically the French, words bad. Anyway, they have a different system. It's a civil law, so it's more codified. The common law and civil law are different in where they originated from in their practices, but when Canada became a country, we decided these traditions would coexist, recognizing their different usages, and they exist within the same legal framework. So if you were to go to Quebec, everything is within their civil code. They do not have the common law, call on the common law in the way that we do, which is very interesting. And also very important, bilingual acts and regulations apply in all provinces and territories. So we have all of our legislation in English and French. And if you've ever studied another language, you'll know that there can be some big, you think, oh, that's straightforward. No, never. There's a whole area of law, statutory interpretation, but also the meaning within the context of the legislation. But whether it's French or English or the way that a comma is used can really affect the interpretation. So just to know that all of our acts and regulations are in French and English. Okay, and then we have the most important, there we go. And yes, I did have to look this up again because I'm terrible with the Latin. The pronunciation is stare decisis. Just so you know, most lawyers are terrible with the Latin, but we still like to throw these terms around, just to make it harder. No, I'm just kidding. But stare decisis basically means let the decision stand. And it's that higher courts, when they make their decisions, it's binding on lower courts within the same jurisdiction. And that leads us to the common law, which is judge-made law. So that's the judges at the higher courts will make decisions that are binding on the lower courts and on parallel courts. The interesting thing with judge-made law is it is not codified or found in legislation. So unlike the civil code, and I can't speak too much to the practice in Quebec because I haven't dabbled in civil law, but it's different in that you have to look to cases sometimes to further understand what the legislation means. And so it really evolved as a system of rules based on previous decisions. And this is why decisions are so important. And you'll understand when we talk about case law, I hope, a little bit now. Think of it as it's a part of the essential aspects of law, but also provides further interpretation and explanation of legislation. Okay, and now I will pass it over to Rob to discuss the different types of primary and secondary sources.
Thank you, Angela. Interesting. Everything you just described creates primary and secondary sources, and this is what things you can look up and read and see what the law is or indicia of what the law is. And in primary sources, think about like history, where if somebody writes a letter and that's a primary source, if somebody interprets that letter and writes a commentary about it to describe the letter, that's the secondary source. It's the same dynamic in legal bibliography. So you have the primary sources here, and of course, have different terminology and different jurisdictions as well. So statutes could be called legislation. Some examples are the Divorce Act, which is federal, and at the provincial level, the Family Law Act. So there are statutes from both jurisdictions, and you'll find them from all jurisdictions across the country, indeed the world. And then there are also regulations, which are also primary, but they come out of a different process in the legislative system. And an example here in Alberta is Alberta Rules of Court. It's very detailed, and it's the legislature may create the overarching statute, but it then devolves that power to the regulators, the administrative state, and in this case, Alberta Rules of Courts. And you also have a bylaw municipal level as well, and you can see things like land use and noise control. All of these primary sources can be looked up in various different places. We're going to show you some of them, and they are duplicated online. They're duplicated in print, and there's official and unofficial sources. So hang on for the next slide. Next slide, please. Another type of primary source comes straight from the courts. So the case law, judge-made law. And here are some examples. Court of Justice, Court of King's Bench. That's right where I'm sitting now. Court of Appeal, Angela mentioned that. That's 3 floors up where I am in Edmonton. Supreme Court of Canada back in Ottawa where I grew up. The federal court has things like immigration, tax court, and the military courts. So some very specialized courts, but all of them will create a record of decisions that can be looked up and relied on. And Angela mentioned stare decisis. Well, that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be able to look up these cases. It can also be very interesting. But hold on, there's another level as well, tribunals, and that comes out of the administrative efforts. And these are highly specialized and usually staffed by experts in their field, such as the Human Rights Commissions. Privacy would be another one. Alberta Labor Relations Tribunal. So you'll find there's some specialists in addition to the courts of general jurisdiction like the ones up above. So lots and lots of choices. Make sure you get to the right level of court in order to get to the subject matters that you're interested in researching. So that's a tip. Next slide, please. Because all of those primary sources of law are voluminous and can be very difficult to just jump into if you're a non-expert, we have these wonderful things called secondary sources, which help to compile, describe, make the primary sources more approachable, and have the citations to the primary sources. So if I was given a research question that I know nothing about, like a tax law question, I have no expertise in that at all, I would start with a secondary source. It would describe the area of law and then give me some of the references to my primary sources like cases and statutes. So here are some examples from our world. is secondary sources, the Canadian Encyclopedic Digest, and it is sort of subject based and pretty approachable if you're a non-specialist in order to get a general overview of the area of law, some of the key vocabulary, and then dig in deeper depending on what you find in the secondary source. So I like the CED, as they call it, very much. There's a companion set or a competitor set actually from a different vendor or publisher called Halsbury's Laws of Canada, and it has the same approach, subject based, and with regular updates. The digital version is updated much more rapidly. Of course, I use both, so I do research in both print and digital to this day, and I think law libraries are going to be mixed or hybrid for the rest of my career anyway. Then there's others, textbooks and articles, and we do have these as well. Law students, for example, will ask for these kinds of things. There's academic literature about legal topics, and those can be in our print resources and e-resources as well. But a lot of the, I would say, the journals and periodicals in law libraries are all going e, and there's very few that are still print as because there's just no room to really store them anymore. There's a real preference for e-resources when it comes to secondary too, I think. We still do have loose leaves, which are updated on an ongoing basis. I have one, for example, on legal aspects of policing that has a new bunch of updates that I have to interfile into the loose leaf on a monthly basis because that area of police law changes so rapidly. So it still is very relevant. And we also have some specialty secondary sources, such as this LISA acronym there, which is the Legal Education Society of Alberta. It's for practitioners, but it's also very good for people just trying to find out things like wills, trusted estates, or business manual, or real estate practice. So it's very good for Alberta-specific materials. Next slide, please. Where do you find legislation? Now, this is one I hope everybody knows already, CANLI. It's open access. You don't need to come into the law library to use it. You don't need a password to use it. And it's accessible anywhere. So it's fantastic. There's the URL at the bottom. And it is a wonderful resource. I use it myself. I use it in addition to some of the proprietary databases we have. But I always go to CanLII, particularly in some areas like unpublished Alberta law, case law, for example. It's second to none. So it has permanent open access to laws and legal decisions from all Canadian jurisdictions. All those primary law sources I was talking about, legislation, case law, etc., live there. The place where it probably is less strong is in the secondary sources, because so many of the secondary sources are copyright protected and locked down. So the primary law you'll find in CanLII almost to a T, as long as it's not that old, like before 2000. But the secondary sources, you might have to work harder, either get access to a proprietary database like Westlaw Canada, or come into a place like the Law Library. It also, CanLII has external links to some of the resources we use here in this province, like the Alberta Gazette, which is the ongoing chronological record of what the legislature is doing, the Assembly is doing, or Hansard, which is the record of the debates, or the hearing schedules, bills, and many, many other things of the Alberta Gazette. I was researching it earlier today, and there's a whole bunch of things, just a change of people's names, things like that, corporations are being registered. So there's all kinds of things in those Alberta Gazettes. Next slide, please. Where do you find legislation in the province of Alberta? The official printer is the King's Printer, formerly called the Queen's Printer. So when we had a monarch change, we also had a rebranding. The Queen's Court became the King's Court, and the King's Printer went through the same transition as well. So you can open access, look up things like government laws, materials, publications, the Gazette, orders in council, ministerial orders, proclamations. I try to stay humble about all of this because it can be difficult sometimes with all these various terms. But once you start using them a little bit, it becomes much more accessible, I think. There's also through the law library a professional subscription or paid version of King's Printer, KP Professional Source, and I usually use it for point-in-time documents, older versions of regulations. It's a little bit hard to use, but if you wanted some practice on it, you could always come in next time you have any legislative research that's a little bit older. So there's the King's Printer URL. Next slide, please. Justice law is at the federal level. You can see acts and regulations. It's very easy to use, and I set up things like alerts on it, and it's quite excellent. It's got Canada's system of justice on it. You can see there's the website. I'll tell you honestly, most of my research questions are in Alberta specific topics, so I don't use the federal resources quite as much. But when I do, I find this particular site to be excellent, so I recommend it. Next slide, please. Canley, right? Open access, excellent, highly recommended. But you could find a case on Canley. You could also find that same case duplicated in the print reporter, and you'll see there still is shelf after shelf of print reporters that have the cases. Sometimes we need to have the print reporters as part of due diligence in order to determine if what's on Canley is exactly the mirror image of what's on in the print reporter. In other cases, it's just a matter of taste and preference. Some patrons still prefer to use the print case law reporters. And then we have court websites. The Alberta court websites have a lot of information, including some recent cases. Westlaw Canada is a very big proprietary database. It's owned by Thomson Reuters, which I'm sure all of you have heard of. And they have a fabulous amount of case law in there. And then you can also do the additional step of seeing what subsequent cases have said about it. So sometimes case law means that the case is stronger. Sometimes it's ignored. Sometimes it actually gets negative treatment. So in order to note it up, as we say, you can go to a source like Westlaw Canada. The alternative or the competitor database is Lexis Advanced Quick Law, and this is owned by the Relax people. It used to be Reed Elsevier, and they have a different suite of materials. But as far as the cases are, you'll probably find almost identical duplication there between the two. We have both of them, and I use them both in order to compare and contrast the results when I'm doing case law research, because there will be some subtle differences, particularly when it comes to tribunals. And then there's annotated legislation. This is a way of looking at a particular section of a code, say, and seeing what cases have talked about that code. And if you can get it to a specific section of legislation, you'll find the cases that have talked about it, and boom, your case law research is probably complete at that point. And one more wonderful tool for finding case law is the Canadian abridgment. It is one of the legacy sets, very, very large set, but it's also available electronically in Westlaw Canada. So summarizes by topic, updated the case law for every jurisdiction across Canada. What an incredible way to search, in my humble opinion. Next slide, please.
Okay, and thank you, Rob. So I'll be taking over, and I had to say I giggled when you said you were humbled by when we were discussing Alberta legislation, because for me it's more I still get a cold sweat when I'm asked about legislation and the particular process. It's not straightforward, shall we say? And luckily at Alberta Law Libraries we've created some research guides that will help you. So if you're listening to this and going, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able able to remember any of this. The good news is on our website, we have a summary of finding court forms and precedents. Rob is also an author. He wrote a wonderful article for Law Now. And if you haven't checked it out, you really should. We'll talk about the Center for Public Legal Education, Alberta, soon, but they have an online publication called Law Now, and it's fantastic. It's intended for members of the public, just a very straightforward explanation of legal topics such as court forms. And you'd think that it would be straightforward, or maybe you wouldn't. It's not. And so the main place to find court forms is on the Alberta Courts website. And I'll take you to that in a second. But what I wanted to mention is that court forms are sort of this interesting area because most of them, in the rules of court, which we discussed earlier, that's more the procedural aspects of court matters in Alberta. And there are a number of forms in there that are used in family law, in civil court, but it's not exhaustive. So there are some situations like torts when you're wanting to sue someone, say for defamation. The rules of court will have your statement of claim, or it'll say your originating document should be a statement of claim or originating application or originating notice, but it won't say what you need to put in there. And so there's also precedents that have evolved over the years, and we have a number of resources that have precedents and samples of information or wording that you'd want to put into your commencement documents. So just bearing that in mind. Sometimes there isn't a form. There might not be a form for what you're looking for, but luckily there are. I think we've noticed over time there's a real attempt to make the law a little bit more approachable, understandable, especially family law, when so many people cannot afford to hire a lawyer. You can see we get a lot of people coming in on wills and estates matters, and although there are forms for that, I have to say they're a little bit more challenging than the family law forms. But whenever we have patrons coming in saying, I was told by the clerk I need to fill a GA1, that's a surrogate form or a wills and estates form, we would take that patron to the Alberta Courts website, and you can see here it's broken down by the 3 levels of court. And so our first question is usually what level of court, or we know that wills and estates is a King's Bench matter. But first we need to determine what level of court, and then in all of these categories, you can't necessarily see it from the screen capture, but there's a link to forms, and then you choose by area of law. So that's the other thing that you need to know. Is it family? Is it criminal? Is it civil? Is it wills and estates? What is the general nature of the matter? And then you will be able to find forms. So it's really come a long way, I have to say. We still struggle sometimes with formatting. Not something you necessarily think you're going to be doing a lot of as a librarian, but of course we do. But we do our best to help people find the forms that they need to fill out. Okay, and so where to find secondary sources? Well, I think you know where this is going, Alberta Law Libraries. So I hope that you maybe understand after our discussion of primary and secondary sources that the law, if you just, look at the Family Law Act, and I'm using all family law references because that's what I did. It's my comfort zone. But you might not understand the legislation or maybe how it affects you. And so the secondary sources, and we have a number of textbooks and essentials that really try to provide a summary of these areas of law that are fantastic. So we have our catalog, which has a link to lists a number of textbooks, which is always a great start if you're researching, if you're new to an area of law. There's also Westlaw Canada, which Rob mentioned, one of our legal databases, a very good database that now has a lot of topical texts and annotations. So they have whole textbooks that are available to view, which is very handy. There's also Lexis Advanced Quick Law, sort of their competitor, their main competitor. They have the Irwin Essentials, which are fantastic as well. If you were to come in and to say, I really want to understand tax law, I think we have an Irwin tax law, but I would probably point you to one of these books first. before getting into the legislation. And then there's the Lisa Library. So the Lisa Library is it's practical. It's intended for lawyers to just starting out or at any point in their practice. But they provide a really great starting point for understanding certain practices. So there's the family law practice manual. There's the wills and estates practice manual. There's a number of them that are really helpful. And we also, in addition to the print manuals and seminar materials, so Lisa holds lots of seminars for lawyers for continuing education. In addition to those, we also have access to their digital library. There's certain conditions that apply, but you can access the Lisa digital library from any workstation in any of our 10 branch locations. Okay. And so now I just want to remind you, after all of this, that we've got you covered in terms of breaking this down. So how to find the court forms and researching cases, finding legislation. It's all on our website from the main page there under navigating legal information. And I can't tell you how many times I've used this. In particular, under finding legislation, we have a legislation table that shows you, depending on how old the legislation is or the orders in council, where to find it. And it's quite it's detailed. It's very detailed, and it's something that I think all of us librarians here reference regularly. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. And just as just to kind of explain, when Rob said humbled by all the different types of documents, it is quite a process from a bill to becoming law. And the legislation table really outlines where to find these documents very nicely, in my humble opinion. Okay, now the great news is there are a lot of, there are a lot of supports for the public. So, especially over the past 20 years, there's been such an issue with access to justice and the cost of hiring a lawyer. And so many people find themselves in a situation where they need legal advice or they need legal information, but they're not able to hire a lawyer. So there are a few services that we'd like to draw your attention to. The first is court and justice services. So usually when people come in, if they've been served with a document or they want to start a legal action, we suggest they call the court and justice services. They have a call center as well, but you can access their information from that their URL there. They have a really good understanding of the court process and can answer, I would say, more procedural questions than we necessarily can. There's also the Family Resolution Hub. This is something that was introduced in the last 2 years. I think it just went live fairly recently. And because of the overwhelming need for help in the family law area, it's really set up as a way for people to kind of hop online, learn about what is it the Divorce Act? Is it Family Law Act? Is it custody? Is it parenting? Is it child support? What are the issues? Through a series of, it's a decision tree basically, questions, you can enter your information and it leads you to the resources that are available, but also sort of helps you to organize your information in a way that is helpful if you do, say, talk to the family court counselors, which are social workers who are able to help with family law matters. And there's the URL there. It's very handy. They made it, knowing that family violence is an issue. So there's sort of a button that you can press that immediately removes the hub from the screen because, we know this, that things can be very challenging when people are separating or having difficulties. So it's a really great starting point for if you are experiencing family law you're thinking maybe I need to separate, or I need to apply for child support, it'll take you through the steps and explain some of the legislation, and what resources are available to you. And I also mentioned previously the Center for Public Legal Education Alberta, just fantastic. I'd highly recommend taking a look at their website. They have a staggering amount of, not a slew as in yeah, anyway, bad use of word, a ton of information about all manner of legal topics, and it's written in plain language. It's meant to be accessible. It's written in a number of different languages. They have YouTube videos. You can self-directed study. It's just great. And of course, they have brochures that we have in our libraries. We carry a number of their brochures. So example is Renting 101 or Family Law 101, which are just great, a really great introduction to the area of law. I can't say enough how great their services are. Okay. And then sometimes you need to talk to a lawyer. There's no question. I know that it can be hard to know. But for example, I mentioned domestic violence. I mentioned family violence. If that's an issue, having a lawyer is very important, and understanding your rights and how abuse can factor into that. So one of the first example of lawyers we wanted to draw your attention to is legal aid, which I think probably everyone's aware of. They provide affordable services in family law, family violence, various matters. So they have a criteria a financial criteria to be assessed for, but they're sort of your first point, I would say, if you're someone who pretty sure you need to talk to a lawyer and you don't think you're going to be able to afford a lawyer, you don't have a low income or you don't have a high income, give legal aid a call just to see if you would be covered. There's also student legal services at both the University of Alberta and the University of Calgary. I'm not as familiar with what they are doing these days, but I know that sometimes they've had, divorce, do your own divorce workshops. Now I think that was for when kids weren't involved, but they do provide assistance also in some situations. So that's another, maybe you don't know if you need a lawyer, but maybe you just want to talk to someone to find out the general area of law. They would be two good numbers to call also. And then there are community legal clinics. So these are nonprofit agencies that provide free legal services to people with lower incomes. So, like legal aid, they have a financial assessment, but unlike legal aid, they don't generally act for people. It's more of a coaching, more of an assistance. They'll say, "All right, here's this. From what I'm hearing, this is the issue. Okay, so these are the forms you're going to fill out, and if this goes to court, consider these three things." They're very helpful in that sense. But I know for the Edmonton Community Legal Center, they really want to empower people in acting on their own behalf, but they're definitely able to help with the legal aspects that can be very confusing. So we have the Edmonton Community Legal Center. We've also got Calgary Legal Guidance, and then there's the Grand Prairie Clinic, which I'm pretty sure is still operating. I hope so. So there are some clinics, and you probably noticed on our navigating legal information uh, section on our website, we have a number of legal help resources in addition to these. So for sure, take a look at that. The final very important thing that I want to draw your attention to is the Law Society. So the Law Society of Alberta is the self-regulating body for lawyers in Alberta, and they have a directory. So if you live in Peace River and you need a family law lawyer, you could select that there using the advanced search options to find the names of lawyers in Peace River who practice family law. There's also, the most important thing is, yeah, the practice area. We get a lot of people coming in saying, I don't know where to begin. begin? Like, I don't know where to start to find a lawyer. So definitely, if you search by practice area and by location, that's a really good start. The Law Society is also, because it's the governing body, if there's complaints, they go to the Law Society. So we have the Code of Conduct. That regulates lawyer behavior in Alberta. So if there are concerns with lawyer behavior or conduct, you would also contact the Law Society of Alberta. Okay. All right. So as a general reminder, this is our homepage again. Contact us. You can call us. You can email us, that shared email account. You can apply for a library account. I don't know if we mentioned this, but we do provide, there's different types of accounts for lawyers and for the public, but the public is able to, any member of the public can apply for an account. It lasts for 3 months and it gives you access to a lot of our e-resources. And I mean, you don't need an account. Anyone can come in to any of our branches and you can use our workstations. We have photocopiers, all sorts of things, but you could use the workstations to do your legal research as well. You can access Westlaw and Lexis from our libraries, but you can apply for a library account that way. And also, yeah, contact us.